Listen, I'm well aware that I just said yesterday that Anthony Richardson, or rather this season, is about Anthony Richardson and nobody else. The question simply being, is Anthony Richardson good enough to elevate this team, right? Is he the guy? Can he stay healthy? All the questions that surround Anthony Richardson, I basically said, hey, nothing else matters when it comes to this Indianapolis Colts football team other than Anthony Richardson. But I would like to clarify when I said that, I was strictly referring to kind of what we expect from the Colts this season. That's what I mean when I say it's only about Anthony Richardson. I'm talking about wins and losses and this team's ability to compete, or our expectations for them to compete. That's all about Anthony Richardson. But when you talk about long-term, there are other things that we need on this roster, and there are other things to discuss, obviously, right? This is a 53-man roster. There's 11 starters on each side of the ball. They matter on some level, of course, right? I'm not going to sit here and dismiss the importance of having a team surround that quarterback, but right now we look at the Colts overall and say we like that roster. Is he good enough to get enough out of them? We think the roster is good enough to be a playoff roster if Anthony Richardson is that guy. You look at Houston last year, right? And CJ Stroud, right? And that's kind of where the Colts are this year, just to kind of express what I'm trying to express to you, right? CJ Stroud last year came in, Texans said, okay, let's see just how good this guy is. As it turns out, he's very, very, very good, right? So they let him go through that season. They saw that he was able to elevate that roster to something different. And then, of course, in the offseason from there, they went all in a way that we'll probably never see the Colts do. And we'll see whether that's the right move or the wrong move. That's kind of one of the topics on today's episode, just a little foreshadow. That's what they call that in the business right there. But this year for the Colts in many ways is what last year was for Houston. Let's see how good Anthony Richardson is, and then from there we kind of start that phase of building up this roster and kind of getting that Super Bowl window, if you will, right? Now, this year, not a Super Bowl year, but a lot of the times you want to build the best possible roster while your quarterback is on that rookie deal because, hell, we all know how much quarterbacks are getting paid. Your best chance to build the best possible roster around the guy is before you're paying that quarterback. So today what we want to talk about are some of the questions that need to be answered about this roster going into this season before ultimately, we figure out what we need to do here moving forward with Anthony Richardson. That's the topic. Questions that need to be answered for the Indianapolis Colts going into this season. I guess maybe that's going to be the title of the video. You'll know it by now. But as I record this, I have no idea what the title of this video is. But before we get into it, you know what it is. My name is Justin. This right here is the Ride on the Bench Colts podcast. As always, ask anyone enjoying, go ahead, shoot it a like. Going to help me get out to as many Colts fans as humanly possible. Subscribe if you want to be a part of the journey. We'd love to get to 3,000 eventually. We're on the journey. We'll get there one day. But enjoy the show. That's the most important part. Audio listeners, 5-star review. Really would love. I have even if you don't listen to the audio version, in the description of this video, there are links to Spotify, Apple Podcast, etc., etc. If you could just leave a 5-star over there, just let the people know how much you like the show. That's going to go a long way in getting the audio version out to more people. That's a very important objective for me this year. But most importantly, again, as I said, enjoy the show. Let's get into some of those questions that we have to answer about the Indianapolis Colts, or really the Indianapolis Colts have to answer to us, the fans, going into this year. And I want to start with question number 1, and that is this. Has Chris Ballard made the right moves in the secondary? Okay. When you look at kind of how we've approached building this team, the secondary has been one of those things that as fans, we have consistently longed for us to get a little more talent there. And when I say talent, I mean proven talent, because you look at what we have right now, it's not that there's no talent. We like Jalen Jones. Juju Brents is a second-round pick. We like him. Of course, you have Kenny Moore in the slot, et cetera, right? Dallas Flowers looked good before the Achilles. That's going to be a tough one to come back from. But the point is that clearly Chris Ballard went young here. He has said as much explicitly. But you look at some of the moves that we have made in the past couple years, and you do ask, did we do the right things, right? We generally have not, for a team that is going young at the position, have not invested much at corner outside of Juju Brents when we've had the opportunity to do so. This year, we ended up drafting Latu. I'm certainly not saying that's the right move. I'm curious just how good he can be, but we did have the opportunity to go secondary there. The word on a guy like Quinyon Mitchell, very, very good out of Philly right now. So there goes this year, we didn't make any moves. You look at last year, Darius Rush, drafted him, got cut. This year, Micah Abraham, Jalen Simpson, both guys we ended up drafting in the secondary, but later on, right? Neither of them made the 53-man roster. This offseason, we passed up on making a trade for L'Jarius Sneed, and we also just recently let go of Darrell Baker Jr., both of which are with the Tennessee Titans now. These are all still young pieces that you could have in your core in the secondary. How about this one? This might be one that gets swept under the rug a little bit. We cut Isaiah Rodgers over a mistake. And what was that big Chris Ballard rant that he went on over the offseason? It was in reference to Adonai Mitchell, right? And he was talking about, put your fucking name on it if you're going to sit here and say things about these guys. And really his point was that these dudes are young. They make mistakes. Well, we cut Isaiah Rodgers over a mistake, albeit a stupid one, an unacceptable one, but we cut him. He projects right now, for those of you who don't know and haven't followed him along the journey, he's supposed to be a major factor right now in a Philadelphia Eagles secondary with really good young players in Kylie Ringo and Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, right? You do wonder, where would Isaiah Rodgers have stacked up again with our young group right now? So all of those things I just mentioned, while we went young, those were young players that we decided to let go. Now, I know you're not going to bat 1,000 on everything, but you do just wonder, has he gone about building this corner room the right way? We just got news that Nick Cross, of course, this was yesterday, is now the starter alongside Julian Blackmon at safety. In my opinion, Nick Cross, again, very young. What is he, 22 right now? I think him and Blackmon together as a starting unit have a lot of potential. I think by season's end, we may be talking about that is one of kind of the young up-and-coming, if not one of the better safety groups in the league. But the depth at that position leaves a little something to be desired. I thought Ronnie Harrison Jr., that was a very, very surprising cut, even in a world where we trust Nick Cross. I mean, you must trust him a lot because Ronnie Harrison Jr. was a little bit of a playmaker for him. People make it like he was some nobody. That was a former third-round pick out of Alabama. Now, we know he's bounced around the league a little bit, but you look at the depth right now and you say Rodney McLeod, that's a former seventh-round pick. We liked what he brought to the table in his rookie year. Last year was disappointing for him. And then the other guy's Trevor Denbo, and that's what we have at safety. Of course, there's guys to elevate from the practice squad. We know Jalen Simpson could play both sides, but he wasn't good enough to make the 53-man, apparently, at least according to the coaching staff. Again, a lot of moving parts in the secondary, but there's a lot of people that we haven't kept, and there's a lot of people that we have kept. And I'm just kind of curious how those things played out. That's a big question for me coming into this season because he's done it one way. He's under a lot of scrutiny for it, and I'm referring to Chris Ballard, that is. But if he's going to be right, or if he is right, he's going to look like a genius. We're about to find out what that's all about. And then on the same page, or kind of on the same topic, another question that I think needs to be answered, and we might get the answer to this year, is Chris Ballard's approach of building things from the inside out something that still works in today's NFL? Now, when I say the inside out, I'm talking about building up front in the trenches first, and then everything trickling out from there. A lot of people these days think that the game is won on the perimeter from the outside in, right? Taking your skill position guys and making that the primary focus, and then working yourself back into the trenches from there. There are examples of both of these things in the league, right? A team like the Detroit Lions were able to flip their entire organization from a laughingstock to one of the premier. And I mean, can you imagine the Detroit Lions? We're talking about Super Bowl contender. They built that thing from the inside out. At receiver right now, they have Amon-Ra St. Brown. And sure, they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs at running back, but that was not before they addressed that offensive line through and through. Other than Amon-Ra St. Brown, they have no receivers that you can name. Jamison Williams, Khalif Raymond, come on. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying those guys are scrubs, but that's a team built from the inside out. Most people would say that's maybe the best offensive line in the league, along with maybe a team like the Colts, go figure. The Seahawks, that's a team that's outside in. How much skill can you possibly have and not make the playoffs, right? So that's kind of a tip to the cap of Chris Ballard right there. You're talking about a team that had Jackson Smith and Jigba last year. They had Kenneth Walker, albeit he was hurt a little bit. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. I mean, that is a skilled group of guys. They were unable to make the playoffs in a division that was good in the NFC West, but not great. The Houston Texans right now, that is a team that is built from the outside in. Nobody talking about the fact that their offensive line is relatively suspect when you compare it to the rest of the league. Now, ultimately, they have CJ Stroud, so that's kind of going to be a great neutralizer for them. But as the season goes on, this is going to be something to examine. Outside in or inside out? That's a question that we're going to have answered throughout the course of this season. And on the topic of team building, I guess most of these questions are about Chris Ballard's approach. Is his approach to free agency and the offseason one that is sound, right? The Colts right now stand alone as the only team in the AFC South to really have not done much in the offseason. They did the complete opposite of every other team in the division. You look at the Texans, the Jaguars, the Titans. I can make an entire episode just talking about all the moves that those teams made. I won't because it's a Colts show. But my point is that they were all incredibly aggressive this offseason. And while the Texans seem like the odds-on favorite to win this division, I think most of us would agree it's primarily due to CJ Stroud's presence, right? If they had Will Levis, I'm not sure we'd feel as great about the Houston Texans as we do. With that said, forget the Texans for just a moment. The Jags and the Titans took the same approach they did. If the Colts can beat out the Jags and the Titans, who on paper maybe have sexier rosters than they do, it's going to say something about offseason activity, free agency, and all that type of stuff, and how important it is to a team's success in the regular season, because ultimately there is no Super Bowl that is won in the offseason. The teams have to go out and play, and that's the approach the Colts have taken. Whether or not that was right, we're going to find out. I think if the Colts are able to beat out those two teams, you're going to have your answer to that question right there. And then the final question we have before we sign off for the day, was keeping Gus Bradley the right move? Obviously, most Colts fans hate Gus Bradley. I don't hate Gus Bradley, but yes, I very much understand the cons that come with his defense. The very predictable cover 3 type defense, not a lot of blitzing, all that stuff, but it's the type of defense that when it's done well, it's done very well, because there is no confusion as to who needs to do what on the defensive side of the ball. And when you have young guys, making them think a little bit less may actually let them play more free. So I don't think it's inherently bad. He's a highly respected coach throughout the league. He's had a lot of success in this league, whether we like to admit it or not. But again, we know the pitfalls of the defense, but right now our personnel, at least philosophically speaking, seems to fit what he does. When you have a team that isn't going to blitz a lot, what that does is it empowers the defensive line to not think. There's no stunts, there's no nothing really for the most part. They just rush the passer, stop the run. Just let your defensive line keep it simple and lets them kind of carry the defense. Well, on that front, him and Chris Ballard seem to be plenty aligned. So if this roster is built the right way, in theory, the Colts defense would be a little bit better than some people expect it to be. But right now, Gus Bradley has now led the 28th best defense, or really, and that's a weird way to put it, one of the lesser defenses in the league, at least the below average defense, right, for the most part, for the past couple of years. We decided to keep him anyway in the name of continuity, and that wasn't just Chris Ballard saying that when Shane Steichen was asked about it, albeit the diplomatic approach. I mean, what's he going to do? Say, go ahead, fire Gus Bradley? That makes no sense, but he says he believes in continuity. That's what the Colts went for all around, and they also did it with Gus Bradley at defensive coordinator. Ultimately, him right here, when you talk about at the end of this season, if it doesn't go the way we want it to, who's someone that won't be here next year? Chris Ballard's job is safe because it's tied to Anthony Richardson and his rookie kind of the experiment, which presumably is most of his contract, unless it's a Zach Wilson type of situation, right? Gus Bradley will be the scapegoat at the end of this season. A lot of pressure on him and this defense to perform, come out, and not be a liability. I don't think anyone needs them to be the best defense in the league with the upside of this offense, right? This team is definitely not built in a way where the defense needs to be world beaters, but they can't stink. Was keeping Gus Bradley the right move? That's going to be something we have to find out throughout the course of the season. But without further ado, that's an episode. That's a little discussion on a Wednesday for you, whenever it is that you may watch it. If you haven't already, like, subscribe, all that type of shit. 5-star reviews. Most importantly, though, as always, go Colts.